Are you seriously going to ignore the terms again? Naomi Carter's voice cut through the glittering hall like a polished diamond striking glass, sharp and clear. The chandeliers above the gala shimmered, scattering light across the polished marble floors, bouncing off the crystal flutes held delicately by guests who had frozen mid-sip. 100 conversations halted mid-phrase, laughter fading into a heavy, expectant hush. Naomi, standing in the center of the grand ballroom in her tailored black suit, heels clicking softly against the floor, held the folder of contracts close to her chest. Her eyes, dark and unwavering, met the sharp gaze of David Whitman across the room, his silver cufflinks catching the light as he adjusted his tie with a precise flick of his wrist. He was the picture of wealth and confidence, standing beneath the golden chandeliers, every line of his posture communicating authority. Guests turned in slow motion to watch, some holding phones poised, others frozen as though time itself had paused. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, the subtle aroma of roses, and the faint tinge of aged oak from the ballroom's polished panels. Naomi's lips pressed into a line of concentration, her fingers brushing the edges of the folder, the leather smooth beneath her touch. She had rehearsed this confrontation 1,000 times in her mind, not for theatrics, not for show, but to protect the integrity of her company. The hum of the air conditioning mingled with the soft whisper of silk gowns shifting as the women adjusted to the sudden tension, and the muted tapping of shoes across marble echoed lightly. Even from the back of the room, whispers floated like smoke, a chorus of surprised murmurs threading between the marble pillars. Naomi's reflection shimmered faintly in the polished floors beneath her, a double image of strength and poise, unshaken despite the immensity of the room and the eyes of 100 influential people upon her. The gold leaf accents on the walls caught the light, creating a halo effect around her as she took a single, deliberate step forward, her posture straight, shoulders squared, eyes locked on Whitman. He raised one eyebrow, a slow smile playing at the corner of his lips, but it failed to reach his eyes, which now narrowed with a mixture of irritation and intrigue. The waiter passing with silver trays paused mid-step, as if sensing the pause in reality itself, while a distant piano played a soft, almost hesitant melody that contrasted the sharpness of the moment. Every subtle movement, the tilt of a glass, the faint shimmer of a necklace, the whisper of silk, all seemed amplified against the tension Naomi carried with quiet authority. Her heartbeat, steady and measured, seemed to echo in the vast space, a counterpoint to the gasps held in the audience's chest. Light from the chandeliers reflected in the crystal walls, scattering patterns across the polished wood paneling and marble surfaces, highlighting Naomi's calm determination against the silent storm of attention she had drawn. The room, normally alive with chatter and music, hung on the edge of her words, every person's gaze tracing the line of her form as she prepared to speak, fully aware that the next moment could shift the balance of power in a room accustomed to unquestioned authority. Naomi stepped back from the center of the ballroom, the heels of her shoes tapping a precise rhythm against the marble that seemed to echo through the grand space. The light from the chandeliers created a halo along the sleek lines of her black tailored suit, accentuating the confident angle of her shoulders and the deliberate calm in her posture. She had grown up in a modest neighborhood outside of Chicago, her parents instilling in her the importance of diligence, integrity, and grace under scrutiny. Her father had taught her to measure every decision carefully, to think several steps ahead, and to never allow external chaos to dictate her composure. As she moved toward the perimeter of the gala, her eyes scanned the room with the quiet focus of someone assessing the dynamics of power, noting subtle shifts in posture and attention among the crowd. Waiters paused mid-step as trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres hovered in the air, the polished surfaces of silver reflecting the subtle tension that had settled over the gathering. Guests who had previously mingled in clusters now stood in small, hesitant groups, eyes flicking between Naomi and the imposing figures of the Whitman family. In that brief instant, every detail became vivid. The soft shimmer of silk gowns catching the chandelier light, the faint scent of roses intermingling with the polished wood and marble, the delicate clink of crystal glassware barely audible over the steady hum of the air conditioning. Naomi's hands rested lightly on the leather folder she carried, the smoothness grounding her, reminding her of the countless hours she had devoted to mastering every nuance of corporate negotiation, every clause, every contingency. Her mind traced back to the nights she had spent poring over contracts in her small apartment, the city lights of Chicago twinkling through the window as a quiet witness to her preparation. She remembered the challenges of early meetings, the subtle dismissals by those who assumed youth and appearance dictated capability, and she drew from those memories a deep, unwavering calm. The guests watched as she made her way to a quieter corner near a marble pillar, her reflection splitting across the polished surface, a dual image of resolve and unspoken authority. A faint smile touched her lips as she adjusted the folder, the soft creak of its cover like a whisper of encouragement, a reminder that preparation and clarity were as much a shield as any physical presence. Her gaze returned to the center of the room, where David Whitman spoke to a small cluster of colleagues, the confident tilt of his chin and the precise gestures of his hands signaling the dominance he assumed unquestioned. Naomi's pulse remained steady, her breath measured, the subtle rhythm of her movements betraying none of the tension that might have rippled through someone less experienced in commanding attention. Every detail of the room, the glint of a cufflink, the slow flutter of a napkin caught in a breeze from the air vents, the muted vibrations from the piano in the corner, served to highlight the careful poise she maintained. She had always understood that influence was less about volume or force and more about the controlled assertion of knowledge, presence, and integrity. Even as murmurs circulated among the onlookers, Naomi's stance projected a quiet dominance, the embodiment of someone who understood that power was best exercised through precision, observation, and unwavering confidence. She positioned herself with intent, her eyes scanning the room for allies, for potential points of negotiation, for the subtle shifts that indicated opportunity, every movement deliberate, every breath calculated, a seamless balance of patience and readiness that reflected both her upbringing and her ascension through the corporate world. David Whitman stood at the center of the ballroom, his posture immaculate, hands clasped behind his back, projecting an aura of authority that demanded attention. The polished floors reflected the glittering chandeliers above, catching the light on the crisp lines of his white tuxedo jacket and the precise polish of his black dress shoes. Around him, his family and close associates gathered, a mixture of subtle nods and quiet exchanges signaling confidence and control, the kind of composure that had been cultivated over decades of navigating the upper echelons of business and society. Guests murmured softly to one another, casting glances at the folder Naomi had held moments before, their curiosity piqued by the subtle shift in dynamics, the invisible ripple that spoke louder than words. Whitman's eyes scanned the room, pausing briefly on the array of executives and socialites, noting the smallest gestures, the faint rise of an eyebrow, the tilt of a head, each movement a clue in the intricate dance of influence and expectation. The soft murmur of the piano in the corner blended with the gentle hum of conversation, creating a backdrop that contrasted sharply with the silent tension Naomi's presence had introduced. Whitman's attention then returned to Naomi, who now lingered near a marble column, her posture steady, the slight tilt of her chin signaling focus and self-assurance. He adjusted his cufflinks deliberately, the silver glinting in the light, a small, measured motion that reminded onlookers of his precision and attention to detail. His voice, calm but deliberate, broke through the quiet, carrying an authority that drew immediate attention. He outlined the terms, the stakes, and the expectations with the clarity of someone accustomed to having decisions executed without question, yet the weight of scrutiny had shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, toward Naomi. He noted her reactions, the slight lift of her eyebrow, the subtle narrowing of her eyes, movements that betrayed not hesitation but a measured comprehension of every nuance he presented. Around the room, the audience followed his gestures, the rhythm of his speech, and the precise articulation of each word, noting the contrast between the assumed dominance of his position and the quiet confidence Naomi projected. Whitman's presence was immense, commanding, yet within that commanding figure, a crack of recognition began to form, a subtle awareness that authority alone did not guarantee unchallenged control. The ambient light from the chandeliers bounced off the polished surfaces, illuminating the faces of the attendees, highlighting the careful poise and measured expressions that marked those accustomed to social maneuvering at the highest level. Whitman's gaze lingered for a fraction longer on Naomi, a complex mixture of surprise, assessment, and the faintest acknowledgement that her intellect and composure had introduced a new variable into the evening, one that could not be ignored. The music, soft and deliberate, underscored the intricate interplay of power, observation, and anticipation, each note a reminder that every action and reaction was being absorbed, considered, and measured in the ballroom's charged atmosphere. Naomi's reflection shimmered in the polished floors, reinforcing the duality of presence and perception, a quiet yet powerful counterbalance to the Whitman family's carefully curated dominance. Even in a room filled with wealth, refinement, and expectation, the unspoken tension between calculated authority and deliberate composure played out in every glance, every measured breath, and every subtle shift of posture, setting the stage for decisions and revelations yet to unfold. Naomi adjusted the folder in her hands, sliding it slightly under her arm as she approached the cluster of Whitman family advisors gathered near the ornate buffet table. Each step was deliberate, her polished heels whispering against the marble floor, echoing faintly across the grand ballroom. The scent of fresh roses mingled with the subtle aroma of aged wine, creating an atmosphere of refinement that contrasted sharply with the tension she carried. She opened the folder just enough to reveal neatly typed pages, the margins annotated with precise notes that reflected hours of careful analysis and strategic foresight. David Whitman, noticing the movement, paused mid-sip of his champagne, his silver cuff catching the light as he subtly adjusted his stance, the corners of his mouth curling into a controlled, expectant expression. Naomi's eyes swept across the group, noting the subtle gestures and whispered exchanges, the tilt of heads, and the cautious glance of associates who had long relied on Whitman's dominance to guide their judgments. She cleared her throat softly, a measured sound that immediately drew attention, cutting through the ambient piano notes and the faint murmur of conversations that had resumed only to pause abruptly. Her voice, steady and deliberate, filled the space as she outlined the critical details in the contract, emphasizing clauses that could shift the balance of accountability, each word chosen with precision to convey both clarity and authority. The advisors leaned in, their expressions a mixture of surprise and reassessment, eyes flicking between her annotations and the confident, calm figure presenting them. The chandeliers above scattered patterns of light across the polished floors, reflecting off the crystal glassware and the intricate gold accents on the walls, framing Naomi as a central figure of composed intelligence amidst the formal elegance of the gala. Whitman's gaze lingered on her, the calculated tilt of his head indicating curiosity, a subtle acknowledgement of the command she held over the details and the room. Guests, previously observing from a polite distance, now exchanged quiet nods, some leaning slightly to capture the nuances of the discussion, their attention drawn by the contrast between the usual authority of Whitman and the unflinching poise of Naomi. The hum of conversation was punctuated by the soft clinking of silverware and the gentle rustle of evening gowns as the attendees shifted in their places, the room holding a collective breath that mirrored the suspense in Naomi's measured steps and carefully composed tone. Each motion, from the slight lift of her chin to the deliberate placement of her notes, carried weight, the subtlety of gesture reinforcing the precision and calm that defined her presence. Even as Whitman interjected with clarifying questions, the weight of Naomi's preparation and insight became increasingly evident, drawing a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in the room's energy. The polished marble floors reflected her steady posture, the careful alignment of her shoulders, and the focused intensity in her gaze, a testament to the balance of intellect and composure that had propelled her to this point. Light and shadow played across her features as she spoke, highlighting the meticulous attention to detail she applied to both the contract and the atmosphere, commanding respect not through volume, but through the deliberate assertion of knowledge and presence that every attendee could sense, even without a word of confrontation. The room seemed to contract around Naomi as she continued presenting her points, each word crisp and deliberate, carrying the weight of careful preparation and unwavering confidence. Guests shifted in their seats, eyes widening subtly as the clarity of her analysis unfolded, revealing details of the agreement that had gone unnoticed even by the most seasoned advisors. David Whitman's brow furrowed slightly, the angle of his jaw tightening as he processed her observations, the veneer of control momentarily challenged by the precision and authority in Naomi's delivery. Around them, the atmosphere pulsed with a quiet energy, the soft murmur of silk against marble, the delicate chime of crystal glasses, and the gentle resonance of the piano all seemed to hold their breath in unison, attuned to the tension Naomi had introduced. Associates leaned in, flipping pages, exchanging brief glances of astonishment as they realized the depth of her insight and the subtle ways in which her points undermined assumptions previously held by the family. Naomi's posture remained impeccable, shoulders squared, eyes attentive yet calm, a subtle nod acknowledging the reactions without breaking her focus. Each motion, from the precise adjustment of her notes to the careful pacing of her words, commanded attention, a reminder that true authority was often conveyed through measured control rather than volume. The chandeliers above refracted light across the polished floors and the elegant attire of the attendees, highlighting the contrast between the opulence of the setting and the quiet force of Naomi's presence. Whitman took a careful breath, his hands shifting slightly as he absorbed the implications of what had just been outlined, and for the first time, a flicker of hesitation crossed his otherwise composed demeanor. Naomi observed it subtly, noting not in triumph, but in careful assessment, understanding the importance of timing, of measured responses in moments when stakes were high and attention was undivided. The advisors whispered quietly among themselves, the cadence of their voices hushed, yet charged with an awareness that the balance of negotiation had shifted in a way that demanded recognition of her acumen. Naomi's fingers brushed the edge of the folder, grounding her, a subtle reminder of preparation, intellect, and ethical clarity that had brought her to this pivotal moment. Every element of the ballroom, the polished wood, the reflective marble, the soft glow of the chandeliers, the deliberate placement of silver trays, seemed to underscore the contrast between the traditional dominance of the Whitman family and the poised, unwavering authority Naomi embodied. Even as the soft strains of the piano continued, each note seemed to punctuate the tension, a backdrop to the subtle shifts in posture, the brief but meaningful exchange of glances, and the acknowledgement that her careful, composed presentation had fundamentally altered the dynamic of the room. Every observer, from the most peripheral guest to the family members themselves, became attuned to the quiet command she exerted, the clarity of her vision, and the steady, deliberate way in which she held attention, turning the initial challenge into a canvas for measured influence and undeniable authority. Naomi stepped aside near the tall windows lining the ballroom, the warm glow of the city lights outside filtering through the glass and casting long, subtle shadows across the polished marble floor. The chatter of the guests had quieted almost entirely, replaced by a soft, expectant hum, the kind that accompanies moments when attention hangs suspended in the air. She took a deep, deliberate breath, feeling the smooth texture of the leather folder beneath her fingertips, grounding herself as she allowed the silence to settle fully around her. Her eyes traced the intricate patterns of light reflecting from the chandeliers above, the gold accents glinting softly against the muted tones of the evening gowns and tuxedos around her. For a moment, the world contracted to this quiet pause, every subtle movement amplified. The gentle shift of a glass on a tray, the faint rustle of fabric as a guest adjusted their posture, the distant hum of the piano blending seamlessly with the soft echo of her own breath. Naomi's gaze swept over the crowd, noting expressions, micro-expressions, and the brief, almost imperceptible reactions of those who had been watching so intently. The tension remained, but it was a different kind now, a measured awareness of presence rather than confrontation. She allowed herself a small, controlled nod, a gesture both of acknowledgement and quiet assurance, her stance relaxed yet commanding in its subtle authority. Light reflected in the polished surfaces around her, highlighting the contours of her face and the calm focus in her eyes, capturing the quiet determination that had brought her to this moment. Every detail, from the soft flicker of candlelight on the tables to the glimmer of cufflinks and jewelry, seemed to underscore the contrast between the grandeur of the setting and the understated power she projected. Naomi's chest rose and fell in a slow, measured rhythm as she took in the space, feeling the gravity of attention on her without letting it disturb the composure she had cultivated over years of preparation and experience. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, the usual hum of gala activity reduced to a whisper, each sound, the soft clink of glass, the faint shuffle of feet, the subtle sigh of breath, becoming a part of the suspended moment. Her reflection shimmered in the windows, a double image of poise and focus, while the city lights beyond added depth and dimension, creating a quiet interplay of shadow and illumination that mirrored the careful balance she maintained within herself. Naomi let the silence stretch, allowing every observer to witness the quiet certainty of her presence, the steady, unshakable calm that spoke more profoundly than words ever could, a moment suspended in time where authority, preparation, and integrity were on full display, commanding respect and attention purely through measured action and serene composure. David Whitman's eyes lingered on Naomi for a long moment, a complex mix of realization, respect, and reluctant acknowledgement passing across his features as he absorbed the clarity and depth of her analysis. The guests in the ballroom, previously tense and uncertain, shifted subtly, sensing a change in the energy of the room, an unspoken acknowledgement that the balance of authority had quietly, irrevocably shifted. Naomi's posture remained unwavering, shoulders squared, hands resting lightly on the folder, her calm focus a quiet assertion of mastery that needed no overt display. The golden glow of the chandeliers above reflected in her eyes, adding a soft radiance that contrasted with the crisp lines of her black tailored suit and the polished marble floors, while the subtle hum of conversation threaded through the space, carrying hints of surprise and admiration. Whitman adjusted his cufflinks slowly, his expression softening, a subtle nod acknowledging the accuracy of her observations and the impossibility of contesting her composed command. Around them, murmurs arose gently, the sound measured, the audience responding not to volume, but to the undeniable clarity and ethical precision Naomi projected. The piano in the corner played on, each note highlighting the contrast between the structured elegance of the event and the quiet power of the moment unfolding at its center. Naomi's gaze swept the room, meeting eyes, catching brief glances that registered both astonishment and new understanding, reinforcing the subtle authority she had cultivated through preparation, insight, and composure. Light shimmered off the polished surfaces, from crystal glasses to reflective floors, casting patterns that mirrored the tension resolving into recognition, the soft glint of chandeliers tracing arcs across faces that had been poised in anticipation. David Whitman, aware of the unspoken acknowledgement surrounding him, shifted slightly, the faintest lift of his chin signaling both a concession and a measure of respect, a recognition that intellect and composure could command attention without assertion of conventional dominance. Naomi's steady presence, the deliberate pacing of her movements, and the quiet precision of her explanations had transformed the dynamic, creating a room in which understanding, integrity, and careful reasoning carried a force stronger than reputation alone. Guests exhaled softly, a release of tension mingled with admiration, while subtle adjustments of posture, the gentle flutter of gowns, and the careful placement of hands on folders or glasses punctuated the quiet realization that the evening had changed in its rhythm and perception. Naomi's reflection shimmered once more across the marble and glass surfaces, a symbol of calm authority, measured insight, and unyielding integrity. The room collectively acknowledging the shift as she held her composure, standing poised and assured, the unspoken acknowledgement of her mastery filling the space without a word. Naomi straightened the folder against her chest and began moving toward the grand exit of the ballroom, each step deliberate, measured, and filled with the quiet certainty that had defined her presence throughout the evening. The golden light from the chandeliers caught the edges of her tailored suit, casting a soft glow across the marble floors as guests slowly shifted their attention, some craning their necks for a final glance, others nodding subtly in acknowledgement of the integrity she had demonstrated. David Whitman watched her with a complex mixture of respect and realization in his eyes, the weight of the evening settling across his expression as he adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, the polished silver glinting under the ambient light. Associates and family members followed his gaze, the subtle hum of whispered commentary filling the spaces between the soft music notes. Yet none interrupted the silent momentum Naomi carried as she moved toward the doors. The delicate rustle of her heels against the polished stone created a rhythm that seemed to command attention without a word, a sound that resonated across the room, like a quiet affirmation of authority earned through preparation, clarity, and unwavering ethical precision. The ambient light shifted with the movement of her figure, creating fleeting reflections across crystal glasses, gold-accented tableware, and the polished surfaces of the grand reception area, emphasizing the contrast between the opulence of the setting and the quiet force of her deliberate composure. Each observer felt the subtle shift in the energy, the acknowledgement that authority and respect could be commanded without raised voices, only through steadfast presence and measured intellect. Naomi's gaze briefly met that of David Whitman once more, a calm, assertive look that spoke volumes without requiring dialogue, a statement of principle and confidence that transcended the formal setting of the gala. The room seemed to exhale collectively as she passed, the soft murmur of the remaining conversations threading through the light strains of the piano, punctuating the gravity of the unspoken lessons imparted in the elegance of her movements. As she reached the threshold of the ballroom, the city lights outside stretched through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting a dynamic mosaic of reflections on the polished marble, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow to her quiet, purposeful exit. The whispers of admiration, subtle nods of understanding, and the unmistakable weight of respect lingered in the air, coalescing into a palpable recognition that integrity and intelligence had prevailed in a space long dominated by inherited authority. Naomi's hand lingered on the door handle briefly, a final, controlled gesture that sealed the evening's impact, and as she stepped into the corridor beyond, the gentle echo of her movement left behind a trail of silent acknowledgement, the ballroom itself holding the memory of her presence and the quiet victory of measured moral clarity. Naomi walked down the quiet corridor outside the ballroom, the soft hum of distant conversations fading behind her as the polished marble underfoot reflected the glow of subtle sconces along the walls. The city lights from the large windows stretched across the floor, casting intricate patterns that danced with her every step, the reflections blending with the steady rhythm of her heels. She paused for a moment at the top of the staircase, her hand resting lightly on the smooth brass railing, feeling the cool metal beneath her fingertips and allowing herself a brief, controlled exhale. The air was filled with the faint scent of polished wood and fresh flowers, a gentle contrast to the charged tension she had left behind, and the subtle resonance of the distant piano lent a soft, lingering cadence to the space. Her gaze traveled over the sweeping vista of the city below, each light a pinprick of life in the vast expanse, and she felt the weight of the evening settle into a quiet clarity. Every careful step, every measured breath, reinforced the poise and determination that had carried her through the complex dynamics of the gala. The subtle reflection of the chandeliers in the hallway mirrors created a fleeting aura of light around her, framing her silhouette as she descended, each movement deliberate and full of calm authority. She passed the quiet seating area near the windows, where a few lingering guests glanced in her direction, some with expressions of admiration, others with the soft acknowledgement of an unspoken lesson in presence and integrity. Naomi's mind traced back briefly to the preparation that had guided her every word and action, the hours spent analyzing clauses, rehearsing responses, and cultivating the precise balance of firmness and grace that defined her professional approach. The cool marble echoed under her careful steps, a subtle reminder of the journey from meticulous planning to flawless execution, the corridor itself reflecting a sense of purpose and measured control. Light from the sconces played across the polished surfaces, highlighting the gentle contours of her posture and the unwavering focus in her eyes, each shadow and glimmer reinforcing the quiet impact of her decisions and presence. Naomi reached the end of the hall, the doors opening onto a calm, dimly lit lobby that stretched toward the street beyond, the ambient city glow filtering in through the large glass panes. She paused just inside the doorway, her silhouette framed against the subtle light, the folder in her hand a testament to preparation and principle. The soft hum of the evening outside, the occasional distant car horn, and the muted rustle of leaves from the city trees created a gentle backdrop to her poised stance, encapsulating the quiet triumph of integrity and insight. In that suspended moment, the space seemed to honor the balance she had achieved, a room transformed not by noise or assertion but by presence, clarity, and unwavering ethical authority, leaving an indelible impression on both those who had observed and the world she now stepped back into, composed, resolute, and fully in command of the path ahead.